Greetings, my dear viewers, and welcome back to Spyrovember 2024. Unpopular opinions. Aren't they just wonderful? The way a select minority have a different opinion on something, only to get absolutely destroyed by terminally online man-children who are so sensitive and immature, they can't even take the fact that people like and dislike things that they don't. Yeah, isn't it fun to piss off sad asses like them? Isn't it fun to make them sick and miserable with the virus that is your differing opinions from theirs?
Yeah, it is fun, isn't it?
But in all seriousness, I'm not here today to intentionally upset anyone. I'm here today to share my subjective views on Spyro-related things that the vast majority of the Spyro fandom may not necessarily agree with, and see how they react, while doing my best to logically explain why these opinions of mine are how they are. I've developed quite a lot of unpopular opinions throughout my 3 years and counting of being a Spyro fan, and today I'll be sharing 10 of them with you all. Does this mean that my opinions are better than yours? No. Does this mean you should agree with me? No. Does it mean that you're wrong? No. Does this mean I deserve to be hung, drawn and quartered for spouting such vile heresy against the general consensus? Yes, I mean no. And so, without further ado, I'm about to face the firing squad as I share with you all today my top 10 unpopular Spyro opinions. Not yours, but mine. Mine, is that clear? Okay, mine. Okay, that's clear. Bring on your full wrath, internet! So to kick things off at number 10, I don't like Dark Spyro. Well, I mean, he's a villain, you're not supposed to like him, but what I mean by this is, I don't like the concept of an evil Spyro, for several reasons. Firstly, does every fictional protagonist really have to turn evil, or have an evil doppelganger? Is it really a storytelling necessity? Because I don't think so. I just think it's a tired and overused trope, most of the time at least. Secondly, I feel that the whole good dragon turned evil turned back to good concept should be reserved for Cinder. That was the whole point of her character. It made her extremely sympathetic and gave her a very strong and emotionally compelling arc. Things worked just fine with her alone having this kind of arc, so did Spyro really need to have an evil form as well? And thirdly and most importantly, Spyro is the kind of hero who's badass and tough, yet very cute and innocent. I mean, look at him! Do you really want to see someone as huggable as Spyro with a face like that be turned evil? 'Cause I bloody don't. This is the main reason why I don't like the last episode of Skylanders Academy Season 2, and most of Season 3. Not only did they dedicate nearly an entire season to an unoriginal, tired storytelling trope, but they also did it to such a badass yet adorable and innocent hero. Why? This scene at the end of Skylanders Academy Season 2 absolutely crushes my heart. I don't fucking want to see my adorable purple boy be turned evil like this. Also, much later on in Season 3, when Spyro is finally turned back to good, they pull a Superman 3. Just because. Yeah, no real reason for this to have happened. This is just the writers trying to be cool when they're really not. Basically, I feel that Cinder should be the only one to be turned evil, then turned back to good, and Spyro should be left completely untouched by evil, regardless of whether it's the real him or just an evil doppelganger, thank you very much. Okay, you still with me? Haven't left the video yet? Angry comment? No? Okay, great, on to number 9. Now for my 9th most unpopular Spyro opinion, I'm not that keen on Jess Harold's Spyro voice in A Hero's Tale. The main reason for this is, it feels like a regression to me. Not only did Hero's Tale Spyro regress back into his Spyro 1 mannerisms and attitude, but his voice regressed back into something similar to how he sounded in Spyro 1 as well.
Nasty North. Didn't I defeat that guy years ago? Huh. What are dark gems?
Don't get me wrong, I think Jess Harold's a great voice actor. His other voices, such as Wacko Warner, are really good. Hell, he even voiced other characters in A Hero's Tale, and all those voices are great. His Spyro voice, though? Nah. It simply doesn't really sound like a voice Spyro would have to me, at least not this far into the series. I really would have preferred it if Jess had just done an impression of Tom Kenny's Spyro voice rather than his own thing. Tom unquestionably does it best when it comes to Spyro voices.
Is this rain ever gonna stop? I've forgotten what the sun looks like. We should go on vacation. Somewhere warm. Somewhere sunny.
But the point is, the strange voice Jess gave Spyro, combined with Spyro's overall character and voice regression, makes Jess Harold's Spyro voice not really my cup of tea. It could have been a lot worse, but I just don't really think this is how Spyro should sound. Don't really have much more to say than this, so moving on. Number 8, the Trolley and Alchemist escort minigames in Spyro 2 aren't actually that infuriatingly difficult. Look, I get it. I can see why most Spyro fans get pissed off by these too many games. Hell, the first time I ever played Spyro 2, it took me at least a dozen attempts each to complete both these minigames. But once you've nailed all the trial and error of them, i.e. memorized exactly where all the obstacles around the trolley tracks are, and exactly where you need to jump, dodge blocks, or fire the cannon, and in the case of the Alchemist escort, memorize the exact route the idiot alchemist, who doesn't even realize Hunter is right next door to him, and he doesn't have to go on that convoluted route past all those Earthshapers who want to fuck his potion over, takes past said Earthshapers, and you've memorized exactly which Earthshapers to knock back and when. Neither of these minigames are that hard, honestly. And dare I say it, they become pretty fun. As I said, it just takes a lot of practice and a lot of trial and error. After that, it's actually pretty likely you'll complete these minigames first time on replays. I completed the trolley minigame first time during my Spyro 2 gameplay series 3 years ago, without even really thinking about it.
Oh my god, I actually did it on my first try! I didn't have to hear this guy say trouble with the trolley even once. Oh my god! You know, I think that's the first time I've ever done a 5-star difficulty challenge on this game, first time. Oh my god, I am so proud of myself. I did not have to hear that guy say trouble with the trolley even once.
Now, if you want to talk about minigames that are actually infuriatingly difficult, look no further than the Chinese Dragon Battle and Yeti Boxing minigames in Spyro 3. These two are way more rage-inducing and suck way harder than any of the difficult minigames in Spyro 2. Don't get me wrong, most of Spyro 3's minigames are still very fun. The Chinese Dragon and Yeti Boxing ones, though, not so much. The Trolley and Alchemist minigames are a breeze in comparison to them. Oh god, shippers are gonna absolutely slaughter me for saying this. I don't think Spyro and Cinder should be in a romantic relationship. I mean, ask yourself this. Do the main male and main female characters of every single piece of narrative work always have to have the hots for each other? Is it always a storytelling necessity? No, absolutely not. And in Spyro and Cinder's case, it certainly isn't necessary. I really feel Spyro and Cinder work better as simple best friends than a full-on couple. Especially as neither of them implied they had any romantic feelings towards the other until the very end of Dawn of the Dragon, where Cinder, right out of the blue, with no prior build-up, implications, or foreshadowing, says,
I love you.
And that was only written into the script to appease those fans who'd already begun shipping Spyro and Cinder together prior to Dawn of the Dragon's release. So basically, Spyro and Cinder are only in a romantic relationship because of shippers who falsely believe that these two just have to be in love. They didn't work together as a team because they had the hots for each other. They worked together as a team because they become simple best friends after Spyro saves Cinder from being corrupted by Malfoy and forced to serve him. They have so much better chemistry and bounce off each other way better as best friends than they do as a couple. Not all friendships where both people are the opposite gender have to turn into romantic relationships. Also, what many shippers seem to forget is that in the last cutscene of Year of the Dragon before the end credits, Spyro says this.
It's a sad sight, Sparks. Another noble warrior falls victim to the plague of love. Just look away. Well, I guess we'll have to find the rest of the eggs by ourselves.
So yeah, regardless of Legend of Spyro being a separate canon from the original series, Spyro has never even had any interest in romance to begin with. And with Cinder being the tough tomboy warrior she now is, I doubt she'd be the type to have any interest in romance either. So basically, Spyro and Cinder work better as simple best friends, and any toxic shippers who stubbornly refuse to see why others think this can suck my, bell end.
It was an almost right.
Number 6, Spooky Swamp in Spyro 3 kinda sucks. I mean, for starters, just look at this place and take in its atmosphere. The fog, the constant rain, the overgrown vegetation, the piranha-infested waters, the lack of natural light. If this doesn't shout gloomy and depressing, I don't know what does. Okay, atmosphere isn't everything. Is the world fun to play at least? Well, I guess. I do admittedly enjoy gliding between the trees to reach one of the eggs, but this world pales in comparison to all the other far more amazing worlds you encounter throughout Spyro 3. One of the main reasons for this being Spooky Swamp's enemies, some of which are among the most unsettling in the entire original trilogy, such as these horrific Pinocchio-nosed wasp things. There are of course also the usual Rhinox, which I'm completely chill with, but these little fuckers right here, just burn them before they lay eggs. Do the same to those fucking piranhas that bite the shit out of you every time you go in the water. They just make this world so much harder to navigate than other worlds, even if you end up in Spooky Swamp's waters by accident. Sheila's side level and the mini-boss fight against Sleepyhead are decent, I suppose, but these two challenges are nothing to really write home about compared to Spyro 3's other Sheila levels and boss fights. And as for that haiku poetry this world's also known for, I ain't that big on it, honestly. Overall, Spooky Swamp is probably the most lackluster world, not just of Spyro 3, but of the entire original trilogy, and I hope you guys can see why I think this. Now for number 5, Blink the Mole's levels in A Hero's Tale are actually alright. Like with the Trolley and Alchemist minigames in Spyro 2, I get it. From playing these levels myself, I can see why people hate Blink's levels. But I don't. Sue me. Blink himself controls alright, the level design is flawed but decent, the puzzle solving these levels offer is reasonably fun, the laser and bombs are also fun to use, digging through the soil to find new areas of each level is a cool mechanic you don't see in many other games, plus it's always intriguing to discover where you'll end up next. Sure, these levels' enemies can be a right pain in the dick to kill, especially if you get too close to them and considering how many laser hits some of them take before they finally die, but everything else I like or at least find decent about Blink's levels makes up for that. I simply like Blink's character design and personality as well. He's cute and lovable. Not as cute and lovable as Spyro, but still cute and lovable. Just give this little guy a break, would you please, guys? His levels are not the worst part of this game. Sparks' levels, plus the turret mini-games, while still fun to a degree, are way more deserving of that title than Blink and his levels. Yes, I don't like Dawn of the Dragon's ending. Hang me. I fail to understand why the Legend trilogy had to end on such an extremely bittersweet note. The first time I watched this cutscene on YouTube, I was very emotionally shaken by it. I'm sure seeing Spyro sacrifice himself to pull the entire world back together would have devastated the majority of Spyro fans too. I get that this is the whole point of the ending, to be as tear-jerking as possible with the gorgeous visuals, heart-touching music, and the fact Spyro appears to have died from releasing all his energy to fix Malfor's destruction. But like, I don't care if this is the much darker and more serious era of the series. This is just way too emotional for a Spyro game. Period. Call it being subversive by not having a 100% happy ending if you like, but that approach simply doesn't work for me in this case. Bittersweetness aside, it's also just a really confusing ending that raises countless questions. Firstly, how did Spyro and Cinder get from the literal Earth's core back to the Valley of Avalar? If Spyro's put the world back together, how did they get back to the Earth's surface? You gonna explain that, game? No? Okay, fine. Secondly, what exactly did Ignitus mean by...
When a dragon dies, he does not truly leave this world. His spirit lives on, binding itself with nature, offering hope for the future.
In initial context, he's of course referring to how Spyro sacrifices himself to save the world, and how he releases all his energy to fix the planet by binding said energy with the planet, and by extension, nature itself. But then the post-credits cutscene completely breaks this meaning, because we see both Spyro and Cinder alive and well, happily flying above the Valley of Avalar together. But then when we take interpretations of this into account, this only begins to raise even more questions. Are those two actually Spyro and Cinder? And is that actually the Valley of Avalar? Or is this just their spirits flying happily together in heaven? The golden and somewhat angelic appearance of Avalar here suggests that this is actually heaven, but Spyro and Cinder's bodies look to be pretty physical here, with no obvious transparency to them or angelic glow around them. But then if they are alive, how come this aurora of Spyro appears in the night sky, implying that his spirit is now binded with nature and among the stars? Also, what's the deal with Ignitus and the Chronicler? Why does the Chronicler simply vanish in a beam of light before Ignitus inherits his scale colour? What happened to the Chronicler? Did he unalive himself and go to heaven, or fuse himself with Ignitus? Why did he even need to do this? Couldn't he have just given his books to Ignitus and said, "Alright, I'ma head down the off-license, you want anything?"
Cornetto.
Alright, catch you later, Pookie, call if you need Riz. I can't say that with a straight face. Also, can we talk about the Book of Dead Dragons for a second? If the Chronicler couldn't find any trace of Spyro in the book, shouldn't that mean he is alive? But even then, all that aforementioned evidence to suggest he and Cinder did die still seems kind of plausible, and the Chronicler could have alternatively meant he couldn't find any trace of Spyro still physically being around. Not necessarily that he couldn't find any trace of Spyro being in the book, or Spyro being a rare purple dragon and having such strong magic and powers unlike any other dragon could have meant his presence within nature after putting the world back together was so strong the book somehow thought he was still alive when he isn't. This rabbit hole is literally bottomless. There are far too many possibilities and I'm just going round in circles now. Did Spyro and Cinder die or not? Is clarity too much to ask of you, Dawn of the Dragon? And oh god, my brain is combusting just trying to comprehend all this! I think it might... What I'm getting at is that in storytelling, there's a big difference between leaving things open to interpretation and simply writing a confusing ending that's open to way too many conflicting theories and interpretations. Endings to multi-part sagas are supposed to tie up all the loose ends created throughout said sagas, not create even more by having such a vague and confusing ending open to way too much interpretation. All of that, combined with how emotional, bittersweet and tear-jerking this ending is, makes this ending nowhere near as good as most Spyro fans say it.
The hell? Can I help you?
No more! Please! I beg of you! Your vile opinions are poisoning me! Please! Somebody put me out of my misery! Have mercy on my soul!
He'll live. So can I just say that Carlos Alazraki's Spyro voice isn't actually that irritating? Can I? No? Well, I'm saying it anyway. Now I know what some of you might be thinking. Hold on a minute, train lover. How come you don't mind Carlos Alazraki's annoying, cocky, nasally Spyro voice when you do mind Jess Harold's similar sounding Spyro voice? Well, here's the thing. Carlos Alazraki voiced Spyro at the very beginning of the series. What you have to remember is, this was the beginning of Spyro's character arc, when he was excitable, eager, arrogant and cocky. I feel Carlos's performance as Spyro reflects this side of Spyro's character very well. As for the voice itself, I personally find it way more tolerable than most Spyro fans do. I don't really mind how nasally it is. It doesn't really sound like the voice of a quote-unquote little shit to me, and it's even, dare I say it, kind of endearing for me at times.
Bring them on! I think I smell a barbecue.
That right there is the voice of a young, energetic, excitable dragon who wants to be a hero to his world and all its inhabitants, but still has a lot to learn about what it means to be heroic, which is exactly the kind of character Insomniac Games and Carlos Alazraqui intended Spyro to be during Spyro 1's development. Spyro 2 and 3 were where they aged Spyro up a bit and made him a bit more mature, humble, and laid back. It's also where they brought on Tom Kenny to give Spyro a voice that reflected this character development. The problems started to rear their heads once A Hero's Tale was released, when Spyro's aforementioned character and voice regression occurred. This is kind of a similar situation to Season 1 and Season 8 of Thomas and Friends, actually. In both Season 1 of Thomas and Spyro 1, Thomas and Spyro both started out as impatient, eager, arrogant youngsters with a strong desire to see the world.
Thomas took them to the platform and wanted to run round in front at once. But his driver wouldn't let him. Don't be impatient, Thomas. Thomas waited and waited. The people got in, the guard and station master walked up and down, the porter banged the doors, and still Henry didn't come. Thomas got more and more excited.
What about Nasty Nork? I'm going after him.
Find dragons first. That's all I can tell you.
Where's Nasty Nork? I'll torch him.
Keep your horns on, Spyro! You have much to learn first.
But throughout Seasons 2 through 7 of Thomas, and Spyro 2 through to Enter the Dragonfly, they became much more mature, friendly and laid back, and even acted as the voice of reason at times.
Never mind, Henry, murmured Thomas. I think you were brave today, and really reliable too.
Thanks.
No problem. It's a good thing for you Hunter was around.
I can look after myself.
Oh, sure you can.
Then Season 8 and A Hero's Tale came along, in the exact same year as well, believe it or not, and both Thomas and Spyro reverted to the impressionable characters with much to learn they were known for early on in their series.
Slow down, Thomas, he called. You will break my eggs. But Thomas was going so quickly he didn't hear Farmer McCall. And he didn't slow down. He went even faster. The eggs started to bounce in their boxes. Then Thomas changed lines. It caused a big bump. The eggs were breaking. Thomas came to a junction. He had to slow down. "Stop, Thomas!" cried Farmer McCall. "You have broken my eggs."
Oh, fat chance. I've beaten bigger baddies than you. All I have to do is run around you a few times while I figure out your weakness. Then I just hit you 3 times.
Much like how Thomas fans see Season 8 as a soft reboot of the series, I see A Hero's Tale as a sort of soft reboot of Spyro 2, with how it considerably changes but somehow doesn't completely disregard the continuity of the previous games through making changes to the characters and locations, very similar to how Thomas Seasons 8 through 12 considerably altered the characters and locations too. I'm going off topic though. What does this all have to do with me liking Carlos Alazraqui's Spyro voice, but not being keen on Jess Harold's? Well, to summarise, the reversion of Spyro's personality and voice to how it was in the very first game is mainly what kills Jess Harold's voice for me. But I like Carlos Alazraqui's voice mainly because of how well it reflects where Spyro's character is at the start of the series, and also because I simply find it an endearing voice that gets way too much hate. I simply really like these kinds of character arcs too. If people were okay with Thomas being impatient, eager and arrogant at the beginning of his character arc, why weren't they okay with Spyro being like that at the start of his? Then again, how come no one batted an eyelid when Spyro's character regressed in A Hero's Tale, yet everyone complained when Thomas regressed in Season 8? Bottom line, Carlos Alazraqui's Spyro voice is actually pretty good and gets too much undeserved hate, though as I said before, no one voices Spyro better than Tom Kenny, not even Elijah Wood. Now for number 2, come on people, the bosses in Spyro 1 aren't that bad. Sure, they're a little bit too easy, sure some of them barely even fight back, sure almost all of them, with the exception of Nasty Nork, can be beaten in around 60 seconds, but what almost all Spyro fans seem to forget when criticising Spyro 1's boss fights is that Spyro 1 was only the second game Insomniac Games had ever made. The only other game they completed prior to Spyro 1 was their 1996 first-person shooter, Disruptor. Spyro 1 was the first 3D platformer they ever made, and they were still quite inexperienced even back in 1998, and probably still hadn't quite worked out how to code stronger enemies and boss fights yet. And it's because of this lack of experience they had at the time that makes me feel that Spyro fans should cut Insomniac some slack when discussing Spyro 1's boss fights. Saying that though, I do genuinely feel that a couple of Spyro 1's boss fights are actually quite decent, particularly Dr. Shemp. His staff attacks can be a bit difficult to predict and avoid at times, especially for first-time players. Plus you have to try and flame his bum while he's moving around trying to attack you, while trying to avoid his staff. It can be quite hard to get the timing correct. The first time I ever played Spyro 1, I actually found Dr. Shen pretty challenging, and died during his fight at least half a dozen times. Maybe I was just really shit at the game at the time, but that actually proves my point. Again, for first-time players, these boss fights can actually be quite challenging, especially once you factor in the possibility of falling off the platforms and bridges you traverse while fighting these bosses, into chasms, water, or purple goo, which all result in instant death. You see, the bosses don't need to attack you that much when you can so easily fall off their own levels. As for the other bosses, Toasty is admittedly a joke and is the only one that genuinely doesn't feel like a boss fight. Blowhard may not fight back much, but at least his level provides some good platforming challenges. Metalhead actually provides a nice challenge, where you can't actually damage him by hitting him directly and instead have to defeat him by taking out the electricity poles that power him, while avoiding the electricity surges they generate. A pretty unique concept for a boss fight, that is. Jacques' projectiles can be a little bit unpredictable and a little hard to avoid, and like Blowhard, his level also provides some good platforming challenges. And finally, Nasty Nork's level can be very easy to fall off of while chasing him down. Same applies to when you're chasing the thieves with the keys you need to actually reach Nasty. It can also take quite a long time to catch the thieves and Nasty when chasing them round their respective tracks, especially if you slow down at any point during the chases to avoid falling off the platforms and such. Of course, the boss fights in Spyro 2 and 3 are a drastic improvement and are way more challenging, but to call Spyro 1's boss fights...
absolute garbage fire F-tier bosses.
Yeah, I don't agree with that. Again, this was only Insomniac's second ever game. Come on guys, give your harsh criticism of these boss fights a break for once.
Oh man, I don't even want to say my number one out of fear of people coming to raid my house, thus endangering my family, but you've all stuck around for this long, you've all been waiting for it, so you all deserve to know. Okay, here goes. My number one, most unpopular Spyro opinion is that I prefer Enter the Dragonfly over Legend of Spyro the Eternal Nights. I beg your fucking pardon? What the fuck was that I just heard you say? I said, I prefer Enter the Dragonfly over Legend of Spyro the Eternal Nights. Say that one more time. I fucking dare you. I prefer... What? I love ketchup. So before you all tell me I don't have a fucking clue what I'm talking about, let's address some obvious issues with this opinion first. 1. Do I think The Eternal Night is a much more professionally made game? Definitely. 2. Do I think The Eternal Night has a way more compelling and engaging story? Absolutely. 3. Does The Eternal Night have anywhere near as many bugs, glitches, and frame rate drops as Enter the Dragonfly? Definitely not. 4. Is The Eternal Night loaded with way more content and levels than Enter the Dragonfly? Yes. So then, why do I prefer this buggy, glitchy, frame rate tanking, untextured, content lacking, comparatively shorter than most other Spyro games mess of a game with long as cock loading times, over a deep, well-written, well-thought-out, emotional, graphically stunning, way more engaging game with much tighter and more polished controls and tons more content and levels?
Let me explain. Firstly, I prefer collectathon platformer games over combat-based hand-to-hand beat-em-up games. The end. You can't tell me to prefer a game genre that I don't, or tell me why it's factually better. I simply prefer collectathon platformers. What's the problem with that? Secondly, I simply don't find Enter the Dragonfly to be as bad as most Spyro fans claim it is. All the common problems fans have with it simply don't bother me anywhere near as much as they do for most Spyro fans. I can't really explain why I'm not anywhere near as bothered by them, that's just how it is. Thirdly, the Eternal Night is difficult as fuck. Occasionally bordering on Rayman 1 and Crash Bandicoot It's About Time levels of unfairly hard, and sometimes when you die, the checkpoints can be quite a way back from where the death occurred, and you have to kill the enemies you just killed all over again. Point is, this game can be very tedious and time consuming. Also, at least Enter the Dragonfly, for as glitchy and unpolished as it is actually progressible for the vast majority of players, unlike the Eternal Night. Yes, the Eternal Night is so unforgivingly difficult that players tend to get stuck at various points with no way of progressing any further until the game's unfair expectations of them are met. I've only been able to get an hour into this game, at most, before I finally reached a point where I had no idea how to progress any further. And finally, we have my two biggest reasons for preferring Enter the Dragonfly over the Eternal Night. Firstly, and this links back to how I prefer collectathons over beat-em-ups, I prefer the gameplay style and much lighter-hearted tone of classic Spyro, which is exactly the kind of Spyro game Enter the Dragonfly is, over the gameplay style and way darker and more serious tone of the Legend of Spyro trilogy, which the Eternal Night is of course part of. And secondly, and way more importantly, I simply find the Eternal Night way too dark and way too depressing for a Spyro game, even a Legend of Spyro game. Firstly, it's too dark visually. Every single cutscene and level either takes place at night or in a dark, gloomy cave. I get that this is the whole point of the game's story and feel, but this sort of tone simply ain't suitable for a Spyro game. Even Metal Gear Solid had the decency to set a few cutscenes and levels during the day, or in areas with an actually decent amount of lighting. And secondly, and more importantly, it's too dark tonally. Now that's not to say I'm not a fan of dark and depressing games. Hell, Max Payne is both of those things and I find it really enjoyable. But the difference is, dark and depressing was Max Payne's thing right from its very first game. Dark and depressing was never always Spyro's thing and never intended to be as such. Spyro was always intended to be a fun, light-hearted, whimsical series subverted from the high fantasy setting dragons are typically associated with. And it's the fact that classic Spyro restrains itself from being part of the high fantasy genre that helps to make it such a unique and charming dragon franchise. There aren't many dragon-based franchises out there that aren't part of high fantasy. So when the Legend of Spyro trilogy comes along and embraces the high fantasy genre, and being way darker than the games that came before it, part of what makes Spyro so unique and charming for me is taken away. This is one of the main reasons why I'm not the biggest fan of the Legend trilogy as a whole, and at least A New Beginning was still somewhat light-hearted and whimsical. There are simply way too many dark themes in the Eternal Night. Very few, if any, good things happen throughout the game's story. The characters are put through so much shit, Spyro and Cinder especially. Almost every single location in the game, with the exceptions of the Dragon Temple, the Chronicler's Dream Realms, and the White Isle, is just the shittiest, evilest, most unpleasant place an E10+/Peggy 7 rated game is allowed to have. The sense of foreboding is simply too persistent throughout the game's entire duration. King Gall is probably tied with Malfor as the darkest villain of the entire Spyro franchise, and is just as much of a 5-star turd as Malfor is. Not to mention the absolutely, tonally, jarringly out of place moments of quote-unquote comedy from Sparks.
How is everyone today?
Little bug isn't much bigger than a buzz rat.
Hey, who are you calling a bug, you crazy-eyed, mangy drool mutt?
If that's your way of lightening things up, Eternal Night, it's not working. Hell, even the game's name alone, The Eternal Night, is enough to make it sound as dark and depressing as it actually is. None of this is what a Spyro game should be. This just isn't Spyro. It never was, and it never will be. So I'm sorry to all of you Legend of Spyro superfans who defend the Eternal Night to hell and back. You can bask in the glorious moonlight and enjoy it if you like, but please just let me sit in my dank, dark, smelly, drippy, disease-ridden corner and enjoy the buggy, glitchy, underwhelming mess, as you so call it, that is Enter the Dragonfly. Oh, and by the way, did I mention how sad as fuck the Eternal Night's ending is? How the mountain of Malfor sodding caves in around Spyro, Cinder, and Sparks after Spyro succumbs to the Well of Soul's dark energy and releases too much of it, causing the mountain to start collapsing, prompting Spyro to use his time theory to freeze them all inside a protective crystal, where they remain for 3 fucking years? Really? These 3 go through so much shit all throughout this game, and they don't even succeed in saving the day and don't get a happy ending. What the fuck is wrong with you writers? Why did this game have to end on such a tragic, heart-squeezing, soul-destroying, spirit-crushing, ultra-depressing ending? Why do this to my adorable, badass purple boy? Chrome Studios, I hate you! This video is sure to have a very interesting comment section. I can't fucking wait to read it. Thank you all so much for watching this video. What do you think of these opinions of mine, though? How many of them do you agree and or disagree with? Or do you have some of your own unpopular Spyro opinions you'd like to share? Please, do let me know in the comments. All I ask is that you be civil and mature with each other while discussing your opinions. Let's all remain friends here, okay? And as always, thank you all so much for watching. Please like, comment, share this video with your friends. Don't forget to subscribe to me, TrainLover16, if you haven't already. And I will see you all in my next video. Goodbye, everyone!